The line on the other side rang for what felt like a full minute. What time was it in France right now? Doesn't matter. It had taken me months to track down my long-lost brother to an orphanage outside Lyon. I wasn't going to wait a second longer. The ringing stopped. The line clicked, and after a moment, I heard a man's voice on the other end.
Hello? This is the Perouge Orphanage. How can I help you?
He said, Frenchly. How do you write a character who speaks in a specific accent or dialect without it feeling like a caricature or something that will get you cancelled? If you want to know, this video is for you. There's a conversation that comes up every time I make a video about writing dialogue, and it usually starts with a fairly earnest question about how best to convey a character's accent on the page, but it usually descends into someone bemoaning the fact that they're not allowed to write characters who don't come from their background, meaning that everyone in their book needs to be middle-class whites. But before you start blowing up the comments, let me just say that I understand that completely. As writers working in the modern day, it feels like there's this litany of unspoken rules about who's allowed to write what. Rules handed down from up on high to stifle our thoughts and speech. It's one more thing that you could do before that has been taken away from us. But I'm not here today to talk about what is correct and who has the right to do what. Instead, I want to focus on a writer's main responsibility. More than serving your own voice or the subject that you're writing about, your primary duty of care is to your reader. Every choice that you make in your writing should be made with your reader in mind. What effect will it have on them? How does it help them understand your story, enjoy the reading experience, or create that essential connection with your characters and your material? So in this video, I'm going to show you 4 main ways that writers put accents and dialogue on the page. These will increase in how involved you may have to be in your prep, but all of them will help you make smarter choices when it comes to deciding which is right for your characters. 1. Full phonetic spelling. This is the oldest approach and perhaps the most instinctive one, is to spell everything the way it sounds. We'll drop the G's, switch the vowels, write was for was, and dat for that, wouldn't for wouldn't. You're essentially transcribing the accent directly onto the page. This was a popular mode for 19th century realist fiction. Thomas Hardy did it for the rural Dorset communities that he grew up in. His Wessex novels are a genuine record of a disappearing way of life written by someone who'd lived in it. And if you want to imagine how rural Dorset sounds, just imagine Hagrid from Harry Potter.
Didn't you ever wonder where your mum and dad learned it all?
In Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain used 7 dialects and wrote a detailed explanation at the front of the book defending the care he'd taken with each one. In both of these cases, the author's intentions were sincere. Hardy was preserving something real that in the intervening years has indeed disappeared. Twain was, amongst other things, trying to write an anti-racist novel set in the Deep South fewer than 20 years after the abolition of slavery. And yet, this technique of transcribing dialogue has problems that even the best of intentions can't solve. The first I'd say is practical. When a reader has to decode every line of dialogue, the accent stops being a window into the character and becomes a wall between the reader and the story. There's a chunk of dialogue here from Jim, the escaped slave from Huckleberry Finn, that will take the average reader maybe 2 to 3 times longer to read than any other passage in the book. The second problem is what people may call political, but I feel like it would be better classified as a human decency issue. Standard written English is in itself an accent. It's the accent of educated, usually middle-class speakers, and it doesn't get altered on the page because it's treated as the default. When you render one character's speech phonetically but write another's in clean standard English, you're making a statement about who is normal and who is the deviation. This is what people mean when they talk about being othered. When something as normal as the way you speak is being used as something that indicates that you don't belong. It's also important to consider how your work will be received by its intended audience. One of the reasons why Twain's portrayal of Jim has been criticized since, despite his research and best intentions, is to do with how uncomfortably close it sits to the minstrel tradition that Twain was trying to subvert.
I'll shoot any chicken trying to follow me home.
Well, why don't you get a job and go to work?
Twain's readers at this point, and perhaps for the next 80 years, would probably have been made up of white folks whose understanding of black Americans would have been informed by minstrel shows. And when reading Jim's dialogue, couldn't really be expected not to filter one through the other. Well, it's not my intention to be insulting to X group of people. It's not my fault that readers think that it means Y. An artist's intention is always worth bearing in mind. But if the actual effect their art has is something completely different, then we really need to be looking at whether there's a problem with the execution. Of course, there are contemporary authors who can and do pull off full phonetic dialect at scale. I'm thinking in particular Trainspotting, written by Irvine Welsh in full Scots. It works because Welsh, like Thomas Hardy, is writing about a world that he is from, in his case, the Edinburgh housing schemes that he grew up in. He's using a voice that he had heard his entire life, that he'd been speaking in his entire life. So in that sense, he has the authority, it is his voice. But I think when making this choice, he's also very aware of the impact it has on his readers. If they are Scottish and speak Scots, they'll almost feel represented in a way that they aren't by the canonical works of Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson. When they read Trainspotting, they'll go, oh yeah, I know these boys. This is how I speak to my pals. But I think Welsh would also be very aware of the impact this would have on outside readers. It's a way of writing that will take the average readers a little while to tune into. But once they do, they're in. They've been taught the way that these characters think and speak, and they'll be more likely to feel like somebody on the inside of the story rather than someone on the outside looking in. So, full phonetic spelling. It can be harder and slower to read. It can other your characters when that might not be your intention. Many readers may be uncomfortable if they know that the author isn't of that culture. It can push readers to access their prejudices and view it through that lens, but if done the right way, and it's not easy, it can be very effective. 2. Light I dialect. That phonetic spelling of everything in the previous section has a name. I dialect, as in, instead of a dialect that's being consumed by the ears, is being seen by the eyes. As we touched on it in the last section, the classic example is to use was instead of was. But thinking about it, most English speakers pronounce was in the same way, regardless of accent, so that's a curious one. But used lightly, I dialect can do something quite elegant, and all it needs is a single well-chosen marker. Think about the cultural associations one word can bring. Y'all come back next time. Y'all is an indication that the character is from the American South. In it normally places them in a Southern English working class adjacent background. I for yes nods towards Scottish or Northern English characters. And you don't need to respell everything around it. Set the accent with one marker and trust the reader to hear it through the rest of the dialogue. The classic example of this is Jay Gatsby's refrain of "Old Sport" in The Great Gatsby. It's a term that denotes a chummy tennis club familiarity, and it almost infers a mid-Atlantic drawl that I think most readers assume Gatsby to have. The risk even with light I dialect is leaning on it too heavily, using it so often that it becomes a tick, or choosing a marker so stereotypical that it flattens a character rather than places them somewhere specific. But one well-deployed word used consistently and then stepped back from is almost always more effective than scattering apostrophes across every speech. 3. Just describe how they sound. This is the technique that's preferred by a lot of contemporary writers, and it's one that I urge you to try first if you're fairly new to the game. The idea is simple. Instead of altering the spelling of the dialogue, you just describe how the voice sounds in the narration. Then you actually write the words in standard written English and allow the reader's brain to fill in the accent. His voice was low and deliberate, each word placed like a foot testing ice. A precision and care that comes with learning the language correctly, rather than naturally. You should not have come here. This is not a place that forgives mistakes. And that's it. Just set it up in a way that feels memorable, let the rhythm of the dialogue back it up, and then allow the reader's imagination to fill in the rest. They know that there's some sort of accent, but the dialogue remains completely readable and you don't halt the pace of the whole thing. One of the greatest tools in a writer's bag of tricks is the ability to trust the reader. With all writing, you're trusting readers to imagine things, which they are very good at if you give them the right prompt. A well-observed description of a voice, its pace, its textures, what they do with particular sounds, how it sits in the mouth. These things can activate a reader's imagination better than mangled spelling. This approach keeps the character's dignity intact, and you're allowing readers to hear them at full pace, rather than making them seem slower as their words are being phonetically sounded out. 4. Vocab, syntax, and rhythm. Now I've saved this one for last, but to be fair, this is where it is. This is where the magic is. This is the true craft. Understanding vocabulary, syntax, and rhythm will help you see that dialect isn't just about pronunciation. The idea is that you don't change how words look. Instead, you control how sentences are built. We talk about word order, what gets left out, sentence length, the rhythm and cadence of how a character speaks is almost always informed by their surroundings and upbringing. Anna Burns does this throughout Milkman, which won the Booker Prize in 2018. The novel is set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Though Burns doesn't really name the place, the time, or any of the characters, the voice she puts on the page is unmistakably, specifically Northern Irish. Now, I'm not going to read this out. Everybody in the UK thinks that they can do a fantastic Northern Irish accent, but very few actually can. But in this passage, you see short sentences full of doubling back and repetition. This creates a unique rhythm. It's like a drum solo, but instead of hitting the crash cymbal, she writes milk. This rhythm and the choice to not use complex words feels specific to the people in the place. Crossing back over the Atlantic, Toni Morrison once wrote of a need to better understand how social fear and class relations are embedded into the language of black characters in literature. How it's construed as an alien, estranging dialect made deliberately unintelligible by spellings contrived to disfamiliarize it. In her Pulitzer-winning novel Beloved, she made the specific choice of rendering the spelling of dialogue in standard English, while still using the syntax and grammar of what we now know as African American vernacular English. In this passage here, you can see there are a couple of touches here that strongly evoke the dialect, but none of it is spelling. The specific use of grammar and turns of phrase creates a voice that we now associate with people of that time and background. And it's worth remembering that the events of Beloved are roughly in line with when Twain wrote and published Huckleberry Finn. If we were to jump in our DeLorean and go back to the Mississippi riverboats and have a conversation with Mark Twain, we could probably make a compelling case that his work on Jim's rhythm and vocab would have been sufficient without deactivating his 19th century spell check. Here I've taken a line of dialogue from Huckleberry Finn and I've standardized the spelling, and I would argue that the effect is pretty much the same. Hindsight is 2020, but as modern writers, we have the luxury of being able to look back at writers who have come before us, not just to see what has been done well, but to recognize what could have been done more effectively. So, 4 methods that writers, I'd say, should aim to understand so they can better know when to deploy them, shifting between them and dispensing of them depending on the needs of your character, your scene, and the level of narrative distance that you're looking to create. But before you make those choices, here are 3 questions that's always worth asking. What is highlighting the accent doing for my reader? Is it helping them hear the character more clearly? Is it pulling them into the world? Or is it slowing things down and drawing attention to their difference for its own sake? Are you, the writer, inside or outside the community? Not as a rule to stop you from writing across cultures. Good fiction does this all the time. But the further you are from the community, the lighter your touch should be. A good description and understand of vocab, syntax and rhythm should take you as far as you need to go. And also, what does the writing say about who is normal? If one character's speech is phonetically rendered and another isn't, you've made a choice. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it, but you should always do it intentionally and for a reason. No matter of the approach you take, your goal should always be the same, to make the reader hear the character. And hopefully with what you've seen today, you've got a couple of brand new tools for your dialogue tool chest. If you have any thoughts, comments, or other tips that writers might find useful on this topic, please do share it in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe for more videos like this every single week. I've been Martin from Reedsy, and I'll see you on the shelves.